Well, we now come to lesson 24 in Discipleship Essentials called Sharing the Wealth. And at this point, you may be a little bit confused. If you've already done this lesson, you're saying to yourself, shouldn't this be the concluding lesson of Discipleship Essentials? And yet there's this other chapter, 25, on money dangling out there. Well, let me explain. About 10 years into the publication of Discipleship Essentials in Varsity Press, my publisher came to me and said, we'd like to do a new edition. Is there any chapter that you would like to add? And I said, yes, money. Money is the direct connection of our heart and revelation of our heart before God. Where your treasure is, there is your heart also. But they said, well, let's just add it to the end because we don't want to change the pagination for all those other people who have the book itself. So that's what happened. Well, now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to do a bit of retrospective here on our time together. Here we're at the end of one journey, but I hope just the beginning of a lifelong journey that you have ahead for you. You've come to this point, and it's probably a bit bittersweet. You know you're just about at the end of your time together. You're being asked to go on and share this experience with others as well. And you're saying to yourself, but this is the closest I've ever been to a group of people. I hear many people say that. And so we do have that sense, and you want to thank God for it. But at the same time, we want to share what we've got with others. We want to be able to fill others with what God has done in our life. And if you simply have a holy huddle and want to hold on to what you've got, you're going to kill it. My hope is that you will celebrate what God has done in your life and then move on and find others that you can give your life away to as well. And so as you look back to this journey, first of all, remind yourself of what are some of the landmarks, the wonderful things that have taken place in your life individually or as a group. Some of you may have made major life-changing decisions and directions in your life. Celebrate that as well. Others of you perhaps even went in a different direction vocationally or in a relationship. You have sought reconciliation or cemented a deeper relationship. You've probably been rooting yourself in spiritual disciplines that have made a deeper connection of you with the Lord. For others of you, you may have been like the prodigal that had come back to the Lord with a great sense of embrace of God's grace. Or others of you have discovered, as I did, what it meant to be truly an adopted child of God, beloved of the Father. Or some of you may have started with just this very vague notion of who the Holy Spirit is, but now he's become a person with the presence of a living Christ in your life. That would be worth the price of admission, would it not? Whatever it is, I hope all of you have had a deeper sense of your own journey and call to serve our Lord using the gifts that God has given you in your life. Beyond all that, my prayer for you is this, that as the theme of this chapter says, sharing the wealth, that you will know that you have had a great deposit put in your life. And in that deposit, you are then to pass it on to others as well for the benefit of others. As you are aware from the very beginning in our covenanting together, the very fifth point of the covenant was that you were to give serious consideration to continuing the discipling chain by committing myself to invest in at least 2 other people for the year following the initial completion of Discipleship Essentials. Now, I can't imagine anything more fulfilling, frankly, than you investing your life in others and then getting a front row seat, watching the life of Christ formed in them and people come alive because you've helped create an environment where that can take place. Through your experience, I hope you realize you have been equipped to do this. 2 main things you've been able to be given during this time. And these are a part of what you will lay for the foundation for others. The first thing is the environment of the experience, the microgroup, the relational environment where we were able to model what Jesus did. Jesus invested in a few. Now, it's very hard to do exactly what Jesus did because they were itinerating together 24/7. But at least we have some regular time investing in our lives with each other. And realize Jesus had a microgroup, 3 or 4, with him, Peter, James, and John. They were part of his group experience. So you've been growing, hopefully, in transparency and trust, a central ingredient to our microgroup experience. And as you look back, share some of that honest reflection that you've done those risky areas that you've been willing to share with each other. Could be questions or doubts that you were able to articulate that you've never been able to talk about before. Perhaps there are challenges you were facing in your life that you needed brothers or sisters to stand with you to take you through those challenges during this time. Perhaps you've shared some secrets that others never knew about, but they were able to apply non-condemning grace to you and acceptance. Be the arms of Jesus to you as well. So now I trust that you will have had a deep experience with this and that you know how to replicate this for others. But the second element here that you have been given is not only the environment, but also the content to put into the environment. We like to talk about the microgroup as the container. The Discipleship Essentials content is what you put into that container. You've been taught how to use a transferable tool. The whole idea of Discipleship Essentials is that you have basic building blocks that can now be built into the foundation of people's lives. I wrote this book initially for myself. I needed a place that had some cohesion and coherence to it as to where I was taking people, instead of just piecing things together in a random fashion. And now you have a tool, I trust, that you can then take for others. Though you have been committed to what I would call the letter of the law of covenant, and that is just to replicate this with 2 other people for the year following Discipleship Essentials, I trust that you might consider this an investment of your lifetime, that you will always have somebody's in your life that you are walking alongside and helping grow into a deeper relationship with God. Can you imagine that 10 years from now you would look back and see many people who are growing in their faith because you had some small part to play in it? Perhaps you are part of a larger network of reproducing microgroups in your church, and it's transforming your congregation. So when new people come into your church and you ask them, what's distinctive about our church? And they are readily able to answer the question, you guys really seem to take this Great Commission thing seriously of going to make disciples of all nations. It seems like a lot of you are participating in that. Wouldn't that be a wonderful response? I've been to churches where that has become the reality. And there's one quality that stands out in my mind. I go into those churches and they are full of energy. The palpable zest that I sense in people's lives is there. The Apostle Paul and the writer of the Hebrews used a common image to describe the nature of the Christian life. They talk about it as running a race. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, right after the Hall of Fame of Faith mentioned in Hebrews 11, we read this: Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith. You might recall in our last lesson, we looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 and 25, where Paul compares the Christian life to being trained for a race of getting an imperishable wreath. And then, of course, our memory verse here is in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. And in a sense, Paul is talking about a relay race, handing a baton from one person to the next. Paul says, Timothy, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful ones who are able to teach others also. Paul is generation 1. Timothy is generation 2. Faithful ones is generation 3. Teach others also is generation 4. 4 generations passing the baton. And in fact, we at Discipleship Essentials use a baton as the image of passing the faith from one generation to the next. In fact, some of our churches actually even present this as a part of a public ceremony when people have completed their discipleship group and are ready then to pass it on to others. Great image to keep in mind. So with that in mind, let me conclude with the following story. Let me take you back to the 1988 Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea. One of the premier events in the track and field portion of the Olympic Games is the 4x100 relay, and oftentimes very much an anticipated event. Well, in this particular year, the American team was the outstanding team by far. There was no question as to who was going to win this race. So the semifinals come along, and the American team is out there, and each time they ran, there was always a question, well, will they break the world record this time? And there was always a clock on the field. You could see the pace that they were keeping in relationship to the world record. The crowd was in a great sense of anticipation and excitement as the gun went off. The American team shot out of the blocks, and the American runner was already ahead by the time they started passing the baton to the second runner. A smooth handoff was made, and the second runner took off, and a gap was increasing. The crowds were yelling and screaming. They could see the clock was ahead of the world record pace. By the time the third runner got the baton, the race was almost over, it seemed like, because they were so far ahead of everybody else. And then when the third runner started to hand the baton to the fourth runner, something happened. It looked like there was confusion taking place. There were stumbles that occurred. And then all of a sudden, the baton dropped from the third American runner to the fourth. And the sound went out of the crowd. And there was a hush because the American team was eliminated. So my exhortation to you is, don't drop the baton.